Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to talk about Smile 2. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to give us a movie recommendation?
So the best thing I watched last week was Band of Brothers, which is a 2001 HBO war drama miniseries about paratroopers in World War II. So essentially follows a couple of people who join the paratroopers about halfway into World War II, and we follow them through their training, and then their first real mission is the invasion of Normandy, and from there on they kind of follow the flow of World War II right until its conclusion, with the last episodes being in occupied Germany and kind of showing the beginnings of the Cold War, essentially. And it's a really good historical drama. It kind of starts out a little bit glamorizing the war, and like you've got these young characters who are very idealistic and enthusiastic about joining the war, but then the reality of the war hits very quickly, and we kind of see their successes and their struggles, and how war is not quite what they imagined, but at the same time, as the name suggests, this whole angle of camaraderie, right? Like that they join as a bunch of unconnected strangers and they finish as brothers, essentially, the ones that survived anyway. And it's really good. I think it, as far as I could tell, gets the history right, and it kind of at least hits the big items you might expect from a World War II story. And it's just a solid drama. Like, characters are good, the production values are good, the stories are interesting, the drama is gripping. It ties into the history and the time it's set in well. It just does everything right that a historical drama should. So that's my pick this week.
And does it kind of do enough to kind of like stand out from, other TV series or movies that are like set in World War II? Does it kind of like add anything sort of new to it, or is it just kind of it does what's come before, but it does it really well?
It's pretty much the latter. It pretty much does everything. Like, it follows this one very specific unit that actually existed, and like the major events that are depicted in the series are essentially kind of the big milestones of how they experienced the war. So it's kind of that specific perspective. And that is kind of in, like, every episode starts with interviews from the surviving members of that unit, who kind of talk about their experiences, and that kind of contextualize what we then see in the actual show. So it doesn't, like, it's from 2001, so it's not an especially revolutionary take on anything, but it's just really good. Like, if you haven't seen any war dramas about World War II yet, this is probably the one to watch, I would say.
Okay, so on my end, I don't think I have anything specific. I tried to watch a few different things, most notably the Killer's Game that has like Dave Bautista in it and stuff, but there wasn't really anything that really stood out. I mean, I know people sort of did enjoy the Killer's Game, and just like as a bit of a backdrop to that, it's your typical like your hitman who's come like to the end of his life, or like is diagnosed with like a terminal illness. He finds a girlfriend who falls pregnant, and then later finds out that he actually puts a hit out on himself, and then later finds out he's actually not dying and he doesn't have this terminal illness, and there was just like this mistake. So then now he's got a contract out on himself, and he has to just try to survive and keep his partner alive essentially throughout the movie. It was cool, like, it had you like kind of like typical eccentric, different sort of kind of like hitmans that were like sort of after him, and everyone's got like these like really bubbly and bright personalities and stuff like that. It's kind of got like that element to it, but it wasn't anything out of this world. It wasn't anything to like kind of like sing home about. So that's why I'm kind of like tentative about that one. Aside from that, of course, The Penguins continues to be sort of great TV, and if you haven't checked out The Penguin yet, definitely check that out. And if you are debating checking it out, we do have a review of the first episode of The Penguin, which you can check out just to kind of see first initial impressions, to see if it's something that will be up your street. And with that, we'll get into the main discussion, which is Smile 2. And Daniel, do you want to let the people know a little bit about Smile 2 before we get into it?
So Smile 2 is a psychological horror movie that picks up from the movie Smile from 2022, essentially about a demon that possesses people and kind of tortures them psychologically until they break down and commit suicide, which then infects the next person that witnesses that, and then the infection spreads from one person to the next, and this demon is kind of just feeding on different people. And that's what happened in the first movie, and in this movie we follow a different person who is kind of host to this demon, who happens to be a pop singer who is kind of recovering from drug abuse and a devastating accident that she had a year ago, and now she's trying to relaunch her career. And that is when she gets infected with this demon, and it systematically begins to kind of dismantle her mentally. And the movie essentially follows her attempts to kind of deal with that and figure out what is going on and try to figure out what even is real and what isn't. So, Hervé, what's your takeaway from Smile 2?
This was a fantastic movie, in my opinion. This is very much up my alley in terms of it being something like a psychological sort of horror or psychological examination of a specific sort of character. I think the lead actress in this did a great job because we spent a lot of time with her in this movie, and she sort of kind of manages to convey all the different emotions that she kind of goes through in this, in terms of sort of like being the recovering addict, sort of trying to sort of get her sort of life and career back on track, to sort of the person that's being sort of haunted and sort of being haunted and being tormented by this demon as well. She like does all of that great, like no complaints about her whatsoever. And then just so I didn't see the first one, so I had like no sort of idea as to sort of what sort of the actual like story was about. But the whole aspect of sort of the demon sort of feeding on the trauma of the person and sort of kind of like manipulating them and making them kind of like see hallucinations and stuff like that based on their traumas and sort of like some like difficult things that they've gone through in their life was just like fascinating. And the whole time we was like kind of on this journey with sort of this star, again sort of recovering from addiction. You're just like rooting for her. Like I think you're just like rooting for her, hoping that she doesn't sort of slip up, hoping she doesn't sort of kind of like relapse and sort of uses sort of past methods to sort of deal with what's essentially sort of going on with her. And I think the movie does a really good job, and like the lead actress does a really good job of kind of like bringing you on board in terms of like supporting care. Shout out to the director as well on this, because like there was like a lot of like really cool sort of visuals in this as well. Especially like at the start of the movie, there's like one big like long take that he does at the start of the movie, which was really good. I've seen it a few days ago now, so I can't remember like the specifics of like a lot of like the different shots and stuff like that. But I just remember watching a lot of this and being like, this is like the camera work was like really, really good throughout the movie as well. So this was very solid and definitely one of my favorite movies of the year so far, and can't wait to talk about like some like the intricacies of it as well. But that's my initial thoughts. Daniel?
I'm not quite as positive as you are about it, but I still really liked it. I think it's really good in terms like this really is carried by the performance of the main character, right? Like it's entirely her story, and we're in her head the entire time. And I think the way to enjoy this movie is to kind of be on board with watching her kind of fall apart psychologically and emotionally, and trying to prevent that from happening, and her trying to pick herself back up together and repeatedly failing or having partial successes and then stumbling again. Like that entire thing is the appeal, and I think that is really well acted, really well. Like the gradual fracturing of her emotional state and how she's slowly losing grip on reality as the demon kind of claws its way into her is really good. It's really well done. Might be the best I've seen, like of that kind of story. It's really just carried by this excellent performance and this unrelenting beating down of a character, but in a fun way. So on that level, it's kind of like the anti-Joker in the sense that we're watching a character be beaten down for 2 hours until there's nothing left of them. But it's fun. It's an exciting ride, and there's real passion for taking us on this journey. On that level, the movie is excellent.
Just to jump in there, yeah. It's also a better musical than the Joker. There's a lot more like there's better music.
There's a similar amount of singing in it, yes. But one thing you need to check at the door is any interest in plot and world building and metaphysics and like the rules of how this demon works. I think if you want it to make sense in a literal way, you will be frustrated, because basically the second half of the movie is a dream sequence. This is kind of a spoiler, but it's fine. The thing is that when I've seen negative opinions about this movie, it's been that the second half doesn't make sense, or people are frustrated that they don't know what isn't real. And the movie is not a puzzle where you're supposed to figure this out. We're supposed to watch somebody be grinded into the ground psychologically and emotionally, and that's the appeal, and that's what works, and that's what you have to be into. All right, let's discuss.
Let's discuss. Okay, so you're like me. You hadn't seen the first movie. So in the opening kind of like scenes when we're kind of like seeing this guy like break into sort of this drug house or whatever, kind of what was your like initial thoughts as to like kind of what was going on and sort of trying to understand it from someone that hadn't seen sort of the first movie?
I think it's that the opening sequence is both redundant and pretty self-explanatory. So it's redundant in the sense that I don't think it actually, like, I think so that character is inherits the curse from the main character of the first movie, from what I gather. And so we're basically seeing him at the end of his week, where he's basically at the end of his rope and he's trying to pass on the curse to somebody who deserves it, essentially. And that's what he tries to do, and that kind of goes wrong. And I think that like while that scene was shot in a cool way, I don't think it was necessary. But I thought the basic idea of what's going on, I think that was communicated really well. So the fact that it's 6 days later kind of means that there's some kind of ticking clock, right? That there's some kind of like he's running out of time. That was communicated well, and he really made clear that this other person has to watch another person die, and that's kind of the deal. And I thought that was communicated really well without somebody having to explain it.
I agree again because I was like trying to. That was one of my concerns, was sort of not having seen the first one, how sort of well would this kind of stand alone as its own movie, and I feel like it does a good enough job, sort of one tying over sort of what happened at the end of sort of the first movie for people that had seen it, whilst also using that as a vehicle to sort of bring anyone that's come along for the ride for the second movie, kind of bring them up to speed as to sort of the mechanics of sort of how it works, and sort of introducing sort of the demon and stuff like that in there, which was really good. Again, having not seen the first one, I didn't understand much about sort of how the demon feeds on trauma until sort of kind of things started to unfold in this, and I feel like that was a lot of like you said, like a lot of like what was like really good about this movie was sort of this study of this character, especially like it being a pop star and like kind of having this insight into sort of what like how isolating it must feel to be sort of someone of that level, where sort of everyone around you is only kind of like seeing you as the business person, as a business and as sort of a vehicle of sort of making money and stuff like that, and no one really actually sort of cares about the person inside. And I don't know whether you kind of drew sort of similar parallels, but it felt interesting that she was always kind of like in this hotel room all by herself, and it almost felt like that was the only time that she was sort of herself, really, or like really kind of within like her own mind. And it's like every time like she stepped out of that hotel room, it was just kind of like almost like a whole like different world, almost like a whole different person. Like the only time that she was like actually within herself and like sort of dealing with sort of everything that was kind of like going within her was like inside this like isolated room, which I thought was like really well illustrated throughout the movie.
I thought Skye was actually pretty grounded, in the sense that it didn't seem to me like she was a different person when she was performing or when she was in business mode, so to speak.
In terms of like her being a bit of it's not even just like her, it's more like the people around her and how like they reacted to her and how like they were sort of kind of like interacting with her, and like whether they were like listening to her or not, and like how they kind of like even like something like the dance instructor or something like where she can clearly like where she like hurt her back, and he could clearly see that she probably wasn't fit enough to sort of go again for another rehearsal, but because she said so, he can't go against sort of what she says. He has to like kind of like listen to it. Like it was like stuff like that where it was kind of like different. But then when she was like in actual her own like space or own head, it was just like herself, and she had to deal with herself inside that sort of inside that hotel room, and kind of like be alone with like who she truly was.
And also, she can't be sure what's real even before the demon shows up, right? So every time somebody is nice to her or says something to her or about her, she can't be sure what they actually mean, right? Because there's always money involved. There's always some kind of power differential involved. There are these whole scenes where Skye can get away with abusing her power, right? Like when she missteps because the demon is messing with her, she can just blame it on one of the background dancers, and people are like they can see what like that she's wrong, that's not what happened, but nobody can quite disagree with her, right? So she has no genuine interactions, right? Even with her mother, or at least to the point where she can't be sure what is genuine and what isn't. And then the demon shows up and her reality starts melting.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So those two ideas kind of blended into each other, and I always like it when movies, especially horror movies, kind of make something like that literal, right? So if you have that kind of level of fame or success, nobody is ever really genuine to you. Even if they're not lying, you can't be sure what they actually mean, right? Or if they're just saying this because they're afraid of you, or because they want, like, if they view you as an opportunity or whatever. And then we make that idea literal by a demon that takes over reality itself.
Yeah.
Right. So I always like it when movies do this, and this movie does it really well. It's just my point.
Yeah. And I actually like as well how, like, kind of the movie showed how life was almost like tailor-made for her, like how like her mother like managed her schedule, and how everything was almost like kind of like set up for her, and she just had to like follow the path that was like kind of like being laid for her. And then you have that one moment where she's sort of doing a speech at the gala or the event that she's at, and the teleprompter stops. And then in that moment, she has to actually deviate from what the initial plan was for her, like what's actually been laid up for her. And then that's when you see part of like some of her real emotions starting to come out, some of like what she's actually feeling, as opposed to what's like scripted. And you can like actually compare that to the initial interview that she did towards the start of the movie, where like she's kind of like talking about the crash and recovering from it and this, that, and the other. And you can almost like see that as like these are like scripted questions and scripted answers that she's been given to answer, whereas in reality, we one, find out what actually happened in the car accident, and two, we then see with the actual teleprompter incident is that without that, what kind of person, and like what do you actually really feel, and what do you actually really believe? And that's when she kind of talks about some of the, like the curses of like being famous, and some of the curses of like the position that she's in. And I thought that was like, yeah, that even that whole scene of the teleprompter stopping. It was just like, again, the movie wants you to root for her. So in that moment, you're just hoping that she just finds a way to overcome because that the demon's messing with her in that moment. You're kind of hoping that she overcomes it. And then when you see that she's choking really badly, you just like really get that secondhand embarrassment. And I feel like they execute that scene like really, really well.
Yeah, that scene is like one small escalations after another, right? It starts off with that fly that's bothering her, so she smears her lipstick, and she has to it happens 2 seconds before she has to go on stage, so she just has to power through it. And then the teleprompter stops working, and it could just be a malfunction, right? Like it's ambiguous enough where you don't really know, or she at least doesn't really know, like what's going on. Is somebody messing with her? Is it just a malfunction? Is there something else? I think at the point of the movie where she's beginning to question her perception of things. But and then she's a little bit agitated and hasn't slept right and so on. So she's a little bit on edge. And then with a couple of minutes, we go from her being a bit off to throwing an elderly woman off the stage onto a table. And like in front of like 100 witnesses and rolling cameras and stuff like that. That entire sequence is just a great, just escalations, like in 4 or 5 steps, goes from a little bit off to a complete disaster.
Yeah.
And that's even before things get bad.
Yeah, that's before the whole like final part of the movie happens and everything just like goes completely unhinged. Before we touch on that, I mean, the next point was gonna like actually lean into that a little bit as well. But I was gonna ask about her friend Gemma and like kind of like what that symbolized for her, because you could kind of see, and I feel like the movie did enough to kind of like drop subtle hints that she probably wasn't the best person prior to everything that was going on. As much as you're like rooting for her, there is like subtle like notes to that she's like fell out with like this like one person that she actually like really cares about. It's kind of like ties back into the point that I was talking about, like her kind of like room being like an isolation, like almost like, I wouldn't say it's like her safe space or whatever, but it was like just like a space which was like separate from the outside world. And you could see that in her, well, again, we don't know what was real and what wasn't, but in her mind, the only person that she kind of like allowed into that space, or like one of like 2 people that is actually sets foot into that hotel room, is her best friend Gemma, who she kind of like is able to confide in and is able to kind of like talk about whatever, but for whatever reason has had a falling out. Maybe because for whatever
I thought
reason,
it was pretty clear in several instances. We see her chat history, right? Or at least like the last interaction she had with Gemma a year ago. And I think it's very clear that this guy we see It's not this guy from a year ago. She genuinely hit rock bottom, and she genuinely is trying to be better. And Gemma is the one person who's not impressed by her fame. And so she's the only genuine person she's ever known. I think it's pretty clear that they were good friends before Skye got famous.
Yeah.
And she's probably the only one who stuck around and the only one who did not turn into a grifter. It's just kind of my reading of it. And so when she lost Gemma as a friend, that's kind of the ultimate indictment of old Skye. And so getting Gemma's forgiveness is ultimately the validation of everything Skye is trying to do, right? She's trying to move on. She's trying to start a new chapter. She's trying to be a better person. And Gemma's forgiveness, which she apparently gets early on, is kind of proof that her efforts are sincere and worthwhile and successful. Mm-hmm. And that is why the demon fakes that whole chapter, right? Where the demon fakes Gemma showing up and forgiving her, and they start a new chapter together. And then the demon pulls the rug away, and turns out that, yeah, this entire thing, like, you've allowed yourself to be attached to somebody again, and it wasn't real. Every validation, every reaffirmation you've gotten in the past week has been fake. And you've got nothing, and the person you thought was your one anchor is still thinks you're an asshole.
You normally have a keen eye for what's going on in the movies. Did that surprise you, that twist, or did you see it coming?
It did surprise me, but like when it happened, like when she got the call from Gemma, I thought the entire thing was real, and I think it works. Like, I think if you really put this movie under a microscope and try to figure out what isn't real, I don't think that gets you very far. I don't think this is the kind of movie where you're supposed to puzzle this out and you can make a 45-minute video essay on YouTube, putting together all the clues and whatever, right? I don't think this is this kind of movie. I think the important part is that everything Skye thought she had achieved, she has not achieved. And the demon can take it away at any moment, and it'll take it away when Skye is the most vulnerable. And on that level, it absolutely works. And I don't think there's anything to be gained from trying to figure out how it all stacks up.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. There wasn't a moment between Gemma and Skye's mother where Gemma is supposedly in the apartment, and then I think she makes a joke, but then the mother doesn't acknowledge it. And I remember that sticking out to me in the movie. I was like, she would have said something, but I didn't. I still didn't see the twist coming. I still didn't see her not being real coming later in the movie.
I think it's possible that entire thing was a dream. So I think if you watch it carefully a second time, maybe you can piece out what's a hallucination. I think everything from Gemma appearing is a dream, or at least, well, there are scenes that seem to be like a snap back to reality. But one example of this is when she realizes she's killed her mother in the rehab center. But then at the very end in the concert, the mother's still alive. So that also was a dream. So I think she's been on autopilot since Gemma called. Yeah. And everything about that was a hallucination.
So I half thought that it was real when she was in the rehab center, not when she killed her mother, but the fact that she had been in the rehab center, because they did make a point to say that she was extremely dehydrated, and of course, one of her coping mechanisms to avoid, relapsing was to drink a lot of water, a lot of Voss water. Actually, that was a lot.
Yeah, people have been kind of losing their minds about that, about the product placing. I thought it was fine in the sense that it didn't disrupt the story.
No, it was just funny that it was constantly there. It didn't really matter, but it was interesting in the sense that, again, because we don't know kind of what's real and what's not, we don't know whether she did actually relapse. Because isn't there the scene where I think it's when just before the dancers appear, I think she's kind of freaked out about something, and I think there's 3 white pills that she consumes, and I feel that was kind of significant in the sense that she had started to take some type of drugs or something like that, and she kind of lost a little bit of control. Like you said, that she was almost on autopilot, and she had lost some type of control from even from earlier than that. But from that point on, definitely she her mind was kind of weaker and more susceptible to the demon's manipulation in that sense. So that's why I kind of felt that her being in a rehab center almost was partially real, in the sense that she was dehydrated, and maybe she had been on drugs for a lot of time, and maybe they had tried to clean her up, but by that point it was almost too late. The demon had full sort of control over her. So no matter whether she was like sort of on drugs or not, by that point, I feel like it was maybe too late for her.
I mean, there were painkillers anyway, right? And the one thing that has to be real is that she goes to the friend to buy the painkillers because that's where she gets infected.
Yeah.
And everything after that is up in the air.
It was like, again, just kind of like to sort of touch back on sort of the rehab scene. It was interesting again, like how the demon played on sort of the dynamic between like her and her mother in the sense of like her like lashing out and sort of some of like the pain that she felt between like her relationship between like her and her mother, and in the sense that like she never really like properly listened to her, and all she like really cared about was like sort of her fame and success, and sort of kind of just like just like cleaning her up so that like she can kind of like she can be pushed back out into the world. And then of course you had like the flip side of the mother who like said that she was like selfish, and like the mother like sacrificed this and the other, and she hadn't really like noticed what like her mum had sacrificed, and like kind of like again speaks to her as a character in terms of like some of like the selfishness that she probably had, and it's like the demon sort of kind of like playing off of that, and like sort of like showing her like, yeah, you thought that your mother didn't really like care or whatever like that, but you take a minute to like stop and think about what like it's a weird argument to like kind of like have in terms of like what side of that you're like really on, whether you like kind of like hear it from the daughter's perspective or hear it from the mother's perspective, in terms of like she's constantly having to clean up the mess that she's making, is constantly having to protect her from something herself essentially. But I just felt like that whole scene, that whole like conflict that she had with them, like kind of like unspoken conflict, because throughout the movie you're kind of like shown that their relationship is just functioning. It's not a loving relationship. It's not a relationship where she feels entirely close to her mother. It's just functioning, and to then kind of see the tension that was like really like bubbling underneath that kind of play out. I was like really dope.
I had a slightly different take on it, in that I think the mother cares about Skye, but there's so much money on the line that she kind of has to kind of not care or not be too empathetic. I don't think it's just purely selfish, right? Like, I don't think it's just because she wants the money. I think she wants Skye to succeed, but in order to succeed, she has to push her to success, right? And I had a slightly different reading of that scene than you did, because I saw it through the lens of Skye's fear is that her mother doesn't love her, that she's only a cash cow for her mother. And she can never get rid of that fear because there's no way of proving or disproving it, right? Yeah. And at least as long as she's still doing music. And what the demon is doing in that scene is it's kind of taking away the hope that her mother cares about her, and validating her fear that her mother is just in it for the money, right? Because everything the mother said in that scene is part of the hallucination, but it validates Skye's fear that her mother is not on her side. And that is part of this larger pattern of the demon systematically taking away everything from Skye, right? She makes her attached to Gemma and then takes her away. She drives a wedge between her and the mother by validating the fear that the mother is just in it for the money. When this nurse guy shows up and offers her a way out, that also is a trap. And she fights her former, more broken self in the end, which kind of takes away her hope that she has outgrown her past, because now she's literally struggling with herself, with her old self. And there's also other things like the assistant, who seems pretty benign, right? He does whatever is asked of him, but then the demon convinces Skye that he trashed her room and that she's being blamed for it, right? That everybody thinks she's this unstable diva or something like that. When actually it was the assistant who denies everything and nobody believes her, and so on. So the demon systematically isolates her from everybody and kind of makes her hope for things and then takes the hope away. And that's how it breaks her down. And I think the scene with the mother in the rehab center kind of fits into that pattern.
Mm-hmm. No, I can definitely see it from that perspective. Actually, you added some new context to kind of how I sort of visualize or understand some like kind of everything.
It's a little bit of both, but it kind of fits into this idea of, you thought you had somebody in your life who cared about you, and I'm going to prove to you that that's false. That's part of it, I think.
No, it's more the kind of dangling something in front of her, thinking that like things are a little bit better, and it's just like completely taken away from her, and then sort of kind of again feeding into sort of all the trauma that comes with that. Actually, the movie did that sort of really well.
And all of those things kind of help Skye overcome her traumas, right? Like she hit rock bottom a year ago and has slowly been building her life together to the point where she thinks she can do a tour again, and then that all of that is slowly being taken away, right? Skye thought she had overcome like her old self, but she did it with the help of other people, which includes her mother, which includes the assistant and everybody around her who wants her to succeed, apparently, and that then gets tainted and corrupted and taken away slowly by the demon.
How do you feel that there doesn't seem to be a power scaling for the demon? It seems like, the demon can pretty much do whatever it wants. And it seems now for 2 movies now has sort of succeeded in sort of what it's trying to do. How do you kind of feel about that?
Yeah, I think the power set or the power scale is pretty simple. It can control the perceptions of one person. Mm-hmm. That's it. And it needs to get under the skin of that person in order to get them to the state where it can feed on them and get them to perpetuate the curse. That's what it seems to be. Like we both haven't seen the first one, but I've seen some clips kind of just to get an idea, and that's what it seems to be. Like it's different in the sense that the person is different, but the MO is essentially latch onto a person, find out in what way they are broken, and then feed on that and amplify that and kind of just widen that crack in that person's psyche.
Should they feel like there's a way for the sort of protagonist in sort of the movie? Does it feel like there should be a way that they should be able to beat it? Because in this, it feels like once it has its sort of claws underneath you, it kind of like takes complete reign to a point where you've kind of hallucinated, large events that have happened, and all the while you're kind of like you're almost like a backseat to your body, and like you're also like living in this sort of like fantasy land while the demon is actually sort of controlling you from the outside. So I don't know, how does that work for you in the sense of it feels like very difficult to even like know how to beat this.
Doesn't make a good story. So I was reminded of like this old science fiction trope of it's all a simulation, or it's all a dream, or it's all an alternate universe, where kind of conventional wisdom is, well, it's not real, so the stakes weren't real, and none of the actions had consequences, and at the end the character wakes up and the entire thing is reset and stuff like that, right? So there are lots of stories like this, and I think when they work because it's a character study, right? None of the things that happened in the story were real in that sense, but the decisions and the emotions the character had were real, right? Like Skye, like we see Skye make decisions and have reactions to the events that she's perceiving, and those events aren't real, but her reactions to them are. So I think as long as the movie leans into that, I think it works. Okay. And then the question I think becomes is, we've done this twice now. Does this have legs? I think. Like I think that's the logical next question, right? Can you make a Smile 3 and 4 and 5, where it's kind of like isn't it always going to be the same thing?
I would like to see them take a different route for the third movie, because you have this scenario where she's now killed herself in front of this like large audience. So we don't know whether it's latched onto one specific person or whether it's latched onto everyone that's in attendance. So under the assumption that it's sort of infected everyone that's attended that concert, I would love to see it from a perspective of someone that doesn't actually have it, and almost become like a survival horror type of thing, where slowly, like, well, not slowly, like I think pretty quickly people like start to like understand what's going on, and it's, you've got like this kind of almost like apocalyptic sort of situation which is like unraveling, and then you have this like group of survivors that are trying to sort of like navigate their way around this kind of particular world. And I don't know what the story would be or how you would sort of best execute it, but immediately when I saw that, that's immediately what popped into my head, was like, okay, take it a completely different direction, give it a sort of a new lease of life, and then just completely switch up what type of horror it is. And it could be something, again, it's not something that we haven't seen before. We've seen things like A Quiet Place or Bird Box and stuff like that, where you have to like avoid doing something to attract sort of the monsters. And I feel like it could be something similar to that, but in a more sort of like in a more sort of Smile specific way, essentially.
Yeah, I think it definitely, the point of the ending is definitely that this is an escalation, right? That instead of it going one by one, it's now going to a large audience. And I think the answer is that they all were infected and they all are going through this. And I wonder where they take this. I really hope that, like you said, that it takes it like to a different level and it changed the world this time, right? It's not just the suffering of one person. It's now the entire world going through this pretty much all at once. And making a pandemic movie where you have to stay away from the other person, because in order to not be infected, you just have to not see them commit suicide, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how you stay safe. And I wonder, like once this becomes public knowledge, because it's happening thousands of times over and over again in a very public way, it must be public knowledge, right? Like the reason the demon has been winning is that each of its victims is unaware of what's going on, right? Because by the time somebody figures it out, it's already too late. They've already lost grasp on reality. But now you're seeing thousands of people go through this cycle, and shouldn't you be able to contain them?
Even with that, in terms of like the awareness aspect of it, is you've got one of the biggest pop stars in the world that's just committed suicide on stage. That's going to draw a lot of attention from, a lot of like different police departments, FBI's, that's trying like figure out. Because if you like really look into it, you have one person that's committed suicide, 7 days later, or like someone's been witness to it. 7 days later, someone has committed suicide, someone else has been sort of witness to it, and then you've got this like kind of like long chain of people that have either seen someone commit suicide or have committed suicide themselves. So I don't think it's too difficult to kind of like piece together part of what's going on.
Yeah, and then the question would be, do they just hand wave it and just say, well, society collapses because of this? Because it just spreads too rapidly and things are too connected. Certainly could be an interesting place to take the story, and it avoids the problem of, is this interesting for a third time? But the question would be, is that then still about personal trauma? Because like this whole story has been about like everybody's broken in some way, according to this movie, right? And so everybody is vulnerable to the demon. And if the demon begins to kind of latch onto you, it's over, right? It will eventually find a way to kind of to get to you, and it can always exhaust you. It can always outlast you. And there's no real defense against it other than that, right? And then if you kind of shift the perspective and make it about the uninfected people in a world where almost everybody is infected, is it still about trauma, or are we just making a zombie movie at this point?
On one potential sort of way that they can still make it about trauma, it's about how other people project their trauma onto you, per se, as opposed to some of the internal conflicts that you do, because you have like many examples of like people that were like, people that are like close friends or whatever like that, who maybe go through like loads of difficult times, and just like constantly like trauma dumping and stuff like that. And again, that's probably not the sort of the way that they would handle it in sort of the movie if they chose to go down that road. But you could kind of see where you can maybe have like an element of like how trauma is passed on from like one person to another, especially like in situations where you have like parent-child dynamics where parents kind of pouring all of their trauma and like all of their kind of whatever into their children and stuff like that. So you can kind of see how it could be done from that perspective. But like you said, like the first two have been about the inner turmoil of the victims and some like their personal stuff. So I'm very curious to see how they move on for the third movie, because I feel like definitely we should get a third movie, considering how well this was received, and I'm assuming it's going to make money as well. So I'm very much on board with seeing how it develops.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board with them changing the rules and or doing something different, like what in a way that logically builds on the events of this. I would just be interested how you can kind of keep the identity of the story if you change it from being so introspective and so personal to anything else.
No, because this is how like this one, differentiates itself from like other movies that touch on like possession and stuff like that. Because this one, like the whole like center of it is about like the trauma and like how it like feeds on the trauma and stuff like that. Again, you have more knowledge than I have, but I don't think I've seen possessions done in this way where the victims being manipulated so heavily and like it's just kind of feeding on all the negative aspects of that particular person, just wearing them down based on their past, essentially. I don't know if like many others have like done it, or if it's like novel in that sense.
So that's pretty standard for demon stories or demonic possession stories, where a demon or the devil or something kind of tries to get to people by knowing what makes them tick and what their grief is and what their trauma is. And basically it's not so much about it being dangerous. It's more about it being kind of getting to you and kind of getting under your skin in that sense. And so that is essentially what this runs on, like as a story. In a classical demon story, the demon will try to kind of bribe you or seduce you in the sense of trying to get you to do something. Like a lot of the time, the demon doesn't have actual power over you, but it has to get you to take the step that makes you vulnerable. And then once you've made that mistake, once you've crossed that line, that's when it's all over. And here it's a little bit different, where you kind of get infected by chance. You just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's just assumed that everybody has the kind of trauma that the demon can feed on. And so everybody is a target, but that also means that you don't have to make a decision, right, in the classical sense. And I think that sets it apart from classical demon stories. So it's kind of less interesting in the sense that there isn't a choice, right? Like there's no temptation in that sense. Like you're just a victim. And I think that's kind of what underpins this entire story. Like this whole focus on grief and trauma kind of is predicated on the idea that, number one, everybody has trauma, and also everybody's kind of powerless about it. Like there's no like once the demon is inside of you, it's over. There's no fighting it. There's no overcoming it. Every time Skye thinks she's overcome it or she has found a way out, it's a lie, and it's just all hopeless from the beginning. And
that was gonna be my next question.
Yeah.
My next question, because I know you know, if a movie only shows sort of like everything that's negative, you always like kind of have this like opinion that, you know, but in this instance, if like it's the movie showing that, you know, you can never escape the trauma that's come before, shouldn't it show you how to actually do it, or like, you know, the best way to actually sort of kind of deal with sort of the trauma within? Do you kind of like feel that within this movie, in the sense of like it's just showing that, you know, no matter what you do, no matter how much you try to fight back, you know, the trauma within you will always like eat you up, or like always sort of resurface?
I think it's leaning on the scale too much. I think there is such a thing as overcoming trauma or grief or baggage.
Should the movie show
not
it?
for everybody in all cases, but it is possible. And people can move on and can, in fact, work their way through it. And I don't know that this fatalistic sense of like that's being constructed here through the rules of how the demon works is all that helpful in that sense. Like it's being praised a lot for like talking about trauma and how everybody has trauma and whatever. But it's also saying that everybody is just at the mercy of their past. And it's setting up rules that kind of prevent any kind of progress or moving forward or getting better. And I'm a little bit ambivalent about that. Like, I don't think that's something that should be praised.
Yeah.
Like, and there's also no helping, right? Like, it doesn't matter what anybody does. Once the demon is latched on, it's over. Like, nobody can do anything to make it better. And I don't know that, like, if we are talking about how this raises awareness or about like the moral insights of the story, I think that's a big minus.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing it maybe could have done better was maybe showing that, and I think they did show it in terms of like her, if she wanted to sort of kind of completely let go of this demon, would have been to sort of go with this sort of this nurse that she sort of interacted with. I do think their first interaction was real, in the sense that, you know, here's how he thinks that you can, you know, beat it, but in order to do so, you potentially have to die, and that's like showing like, you know, you have to make the hard steps to actually overcome your trauma. So I think that kind of like
I think the whole thing is fake. I think he was never real.
Yeah. But I even actually I was gonna say the demon shows it can like manipulate the text actually, but I really feel like the first interaction was real.
Well, why do you think that?
It just made sense to me. I don't know. It just made sense that like she had this like one opportunity to actually, you know, to save herself. Actually, no. Now that you say it, because like I was wondering like why, if he was like so desperate to help her and so desperate to save her, why would he text her the one time and saying that he knew that she was in the apartment, and if it was like a matter of like, you know, life or death and like time was pressing, why would he not text back more than once? Was it he text one more time or something like that?
He texts her, I think, 3 times or something like that, and then at that point she's freaked out enough to respond, and I think he actually says something that kind of gets her attention, where I think it's the point at which he says, I like where he names the friend by name and says, I know you were there, right? That sort of thing.
Basically.
And at that point, she responds and says, who are you? And then they start talking. But so that happens after the encounter at the drug dealer, right? And it only happens in her head in the sense that it happens on her phone. Nobody else reads the phone. There's no point at which he interacts with anybody else. Like even in the like, if the encounter at the bar is even real, nobody else interacts with him when they recognize her, right? So, but I think the entire thing was a hallucination. And I think that whole thing was just about another instance of giving her hope and then taking it away. The only question I have about that is, why tell her how it works? Like, it gives her a sense of control, right? That she now understands what's going on and there's a way out. And so when he takes that away, it hits even harder. But why not lie to her about it? Like, why not give her an obviously false story about what's going on?
Let's even say if that would have actually worked. To be honest, we don't know whether that does work or not. Or whether
we don't know if it would work, but we know that it's not real, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like when he leaves her in that basement, her old self appears, and that is clearly not real, right? And then we see the fight sequence where she fights with her former self, with her where she struggles with her past, right? In the most in-your-face allegory ever. And then she wakes up and is at the concert, and her mother's alive again. And I think that is the only the first thing in an hour that's real.
I'm so like genuinely now I have to question. I actually probably need to watch this again because I actually don't know what. I genuinely thought that was real for the longest, but like now really thinking about it, it might not have been. I don't even know what's real in this movie or not.
I think the entire thing is just to exhaust her and to give her false hope and then take her away and then give her another false hope and take it away again, so that it like each time, each step of that wears her down a little bit and erodes her defenses and exhausts her. And until finally she has to give in, has no choice, and she's got nothing left. So I think the guy was never real.
I really feel like every time we saw her drinking water, I think she was probably taking drugs in this, because it's like everyone else or like previous people, it seems like they were able to kind of hold off the demon for a little bit longer than what she was able to. But it seems like from very early on, like she just didn't have control, and like the demon had like strong grips on her perception of reality.
I think that is a coping mechanism that is real in the sense that a therapist told her to do this. And I think it's a crutch. I think it doesn't work. It doesn't help. And it gives her the illusion of control. I think that's what that is. And it's also product placement, but that's a different story. But it's supposed to take her mind off the need to take drugs, right? But that's not her problem at that point anymore.
No.
And it gives her the false sense that she's doing something when she isn't.
We haven't touched on it a lot, but how did you feel about kind of the third act in terms of like? So I know we've touched on it like here and there and whatever, but like overall, like the entire, well, again, we don't even know how long it was a dream sequence for, but like for that initial rush between like her being sort of in the rehab clinic to sort of eventually like going to this Pizza Hut freezer and whatever to eventually being on stage, do you feel like that was a positive or a negative in terms of like how it ended the movie for you? Being a dream sequence and like none of it being real, and
I think none of the events that happen for the most part are real. I think her emotional journey is real.
Okay.
And that is what counts.
Okay.
And on that level it works.
Okay.
Right? So I don't think you can point, so it may be that like her rehearsals may be real, that some interactions with her assistant or with her mother are real. And I think that eventually bleeds away. And all that's left is the hallucination. And I'm not sure it can really be pinpointed exactly where it stops being real exactly. And I think it may be mixed, like the first couple of messages that she got from the guy on her phone may have happened in the real world, but the messages were an illusion or whatever. I mean, it's all possible. And I don't think it matters, because what matters is like her attempts to be better and failing and being constantly pushed towards kind of the abyss.
Yeah, no, this movie is a big trip. This movie is a big...
And normally I don't like movies like this. Normally, I want things to be literal, and I want movies to put characters into situations where they have to make decisions, but the things that have, like, if it gets too allegorical, if it gets too symbolic, the movie kind of loses me in most cases. And here, like, this should be a movie where I should have rolled my eyes nonstop for the last 45 minutes, but I didn't, because it sold me the emotional journey so well. And because I was convinced that what mattered is the emotions, and the emotions were real, even if none of the situations were. And as long as that is true, and as long as the movie actually gets me to care about the person and her subjective reality, like her state of mind and her emotional state and so on, as long as that is the case, it works for me. And the movie did this. Like, from the very beginning towards the very end, I was with Skye the entire time. The fact that it was essentially a dream sequence does not bother me.
So you said you didn't like it as much as I did. Was there anything that you didn't like in the movie, or like any negative? I don't know if you've mentioned any so far, but was there anything that you didn't like?
It's more that I walked away from it saying, "Oh, that was pretty good," and not so much I wasn't amazed, right? Like, I think it's a really well-made movie. A couple of things bothered me about it, specifically the thing about the smiling. That didn't quite make sense to me, because at one point we are told, and maybe this is more explained in the original movie and we just didn't get that explanation because it's a sequel, but at one point we are told, and again, this is being told to her by the demon, right? This happens when she meets with the nurse, and he tells her about how it works. And he says that the smiling is essentially when the demon is riding a person, and an infected person can see that this is happening, and that manifests as the smile. But that would mean that everybody, like all these people around her, are infected, are real people who are infected. And that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be that whenever the demon is getting close, it appears as a smile on a person's face. But that has no connection to who that person is, right? And that makes it a little bit cheap, because at that point it's just a creepy image.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And then also it changes the rules when a person, like when Skye gets completely taken over by the demon and she commits suicide in front of the crowd in order to spread the infection. She's the one who's smiling. But that doesn't fit in with the explanation we got earlier about what the smile means. And so I'm not entirely sure it makes sense. And the fact that that's the whole thing of the franchise, right? It's a smiling demon. And if that part doesn't make sense, that drags the movie down a little bit. Like, it doesn't tarnish like the plot and the character stuff. But at that point, it's kind of a cheap gimmick. And I hope that if I see it again, or if I see the original, or if I think about it a little bit more, it makes more sense. But as I was watching it, it was taking me out a little bit, because it seemed a little bit like the movie is toying with me. Like, it's trying to get me to feel something about it that's not actually there, or that's not actually in the story. And first of all, I don't have a positive reaction to that kind of thing. And also, if that's kind of the core imagery of your franchise, should you have put more thought into this, into how it works, and make it more consistent and make it more believable in that sense? Like it feels real, like it feels like this is what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't ruin the movie. It's not a huge deal, but it keeps happening so often in this movie that I have to wonder, does it actually work? And I was reminded of it like 20 times in the movie, because it happens all the time.
I mean, there is one sequence that's really well done with the dancers in her apartment, which was brilliant. Like, that was like genuinely like very creepy.
It's all creepy, like all the smiles, right? Like also the intruder in her apartment, like the creepy fan, same deal. Like, it is effective. It's more like that doesn't jive with the explanation of you're seeing other people who are also infected.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I think maybe it's explained in the first movie. I don't know. Maybe sort of need to go back there. We haven't seen it, so we probably need to just sort of see if it's better explained in that first movie.
Yeah, and it's just, if that really does, if I'm right and it really doesn't make sense, then that's kind of a big deal, because that's kind of like the identity of the franchise, right? But the rest of it is so good that it didn't bother me exactly, but it's more like it put a little bit of it deflated my enjoyment a little bit. No, I think this is thoroughly a great movie. Like, it's really well done. Like, it really sells you on Skye's journey. and her perception of things and her thought process and everything, and that's what matters in this movie, and it does that well. So on that level, it's great.
Yeah, no, for sure. It keeps you, it keeps you rooting for her throughout all of the movie. Even when you find out that, maybe she's a little bit unhinged, maybe she was the cause of the death of her ex-boyfriend, you kind of still are invested in her becoming a better person and her sort of kind of like overcoming her past.
Yeah,
so
old Skye is awful. Every time we see her, like in the messages to Gemma and in the flashback to the car, she's a different person, and like she's not somebody I would want to spend even 1 second in the same room with. But new Skye is genuinely reformed. Like she's genuinely a better person and tries to be, and recognizes her mistakes and so on. And I think that made her more likable. That she, like, we recognize that she did hit rock bottom a while ago, and she used to be a terrible person, and she's trying to be better. And I think that makes her sympathetic, and that makes her then tragic when she fails.
Yeah. No, I was very, very much horrified once I saw how it was unfolding in the Pizza Hut freezer. When I saw like the door change, I said, damn. I was like, I kind of started to see where we was going with it, and she was going to like end up on stage.
Even the whole thing of "I'll be right back, don't worry." Like at that point, I knew something was up.
Oh yeah, once he like disappeared for ages, I was like, okay. At first, I thought that she would start hallucinating, and he would have to do like a last minute save or something like that.
Yeah.
But once he'd been gone for ages, I was like, okay, something's very off here. Something's like extremely off. And even just like everything from that rehab center, like to sort of her getting like the whole like, her killing her mother, to getting in the car, like thinking that she saw Gemma. And at that point, I still thought that she was like real, to then like realizing she wasn't. Like everything about like that was like executed well, because it kept me guessing, even to the point where, again, like it gives you that last bit of hope where, she says that I'm the one that's in control, and it transitions from Gemma driving to actually her like being the one that's behind the wheel, like giving the perception that she's in control, and like she's kind of like overcoming it, and wherever it like had you going, man. It had you going. It had you like, okay, we're gonna defeat this, and yeah, it just like says nope. Yeah, no, excellent on that part for me. So yeah, I don't know if you want to give it a rating and the last thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is thoroughly excellent. Couple of little details here and there, but yeah, definitely one of the best of the year. Not just horror, but anything. I think it's just a really solidly told story. There's nothing broken about this movie. There's nothing that sticks out that doesn't work. Nothing, no big deal breakers or anything like that. And that alone makes it above average. And then it's just really competently told, like a really competently told story. A solid 5 out of 6 for me.
Yeah. So I'd give it 8.5 out of 10. Great acting, great directing, great story within this. Does psychological horror, which I sort of know is really up my alley. And it just kept me on the edge of my seat. It kept me like emotionally invested throughout the entire of the movie. And yeah, that's all for today. So let us know your thoughts down below in the comment section. What did you think about the movie? Do you know what was real and what wasn't real? What do you expect from the next movie, from the sort of final revelation that we had at the end of this? What are your thoughts on what comes next? Drop it down below in the comment section. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Adios.
Bye-bye.